Hi, I'm Kinsey, and these are my 2020 reading stats and my 2021 reading goals. 2020, I read more books than I have since I was a child or teen. I read 84 books, and so I tracked the books both in Goodreads, but I also ended up making my own spreadsheet partway through the year because I wanted to track certain stats and characteristics that I wasn't really able to see on Goodreads. I'm going to be looking down a bunch this video because you will also be seeing my spreadsheet and maybe my Goodreads. But this is my spreadsheet. This is my baby. Basically, how I started it was I ended up exporting my Goodreads library into a spreadsheet, and then I was able to pull a lot of the stats from that in bulk, basically. But now I just update once I'm done with a book. I just add it to the list with the date that I finished. To start, just in terms of what I'm tracking, obviously, title of the book, author's name, and then I also did author with the last name first, just in case I needed to sort easily by that. Additional authors in case it's there's multiple authors or in case it's in translation. Author of color or not of color, so I made that into a category of kind of simplified racial or ethnic categories. And then I have whether the author is LGBT in some way or cis and straight, whether they are female, male, non-binary author, whether it's fiction or non-fiction was interesting to me, whether the work is translated or not, the number of pages, the year of publication, which obviously I'm reading a lot of just 2019 and 2020 books, so maybe I should be reading more of the backlist. And then I put in the date that I read it so that I can order by month and track that. I put in the publisher after I realized that a lot of my favorite books were by Riverhead Books, because I was like, maybe I should be paying more attention to that, but we'll see if I continue that. And then I have my rating of the book, which is just in round numbers, not half numbers, just so that it matches the Goodreads. And then the average rating that's on Goodreads, to see if I disagree or not, just out of curiosity. So that's a spreadsheet, but I have this other tab for stats. So I gotta love my stats. So in here, I pulled certain numbers from the previous tab. So this is the total number of pages I read in 2020. So that's 23,332, which I believe is much higher than last year, both because I read more books and I think my average page length that I read was about the same. It's down here. It's 278 books was the average length of a book for me, which is obviously kind of low. But I do read a lot of books that are on the shorter side, just essay collections. And I do like shorter books generally, but I also like longer books. So yeah, that's interesting. And then this ended up being a category of my average rating for all the books I read versus Goodreads' average rating for all the books that I read also, just to see if I was more critical or more of a fan. But I think because there's some books that are not as liked that I love, and then maybe some books that are well loved but I don't like, I think that those end up being very close to each other because clearly they're both 3.9, so I'm probably rating a lot of books either the same or it's making up for it, when it swings back the opposite way. And then I have the books I read by month of the year. And you can see when we went into quarantine, I went wild. In April, May, and June, I read double-digit numbers of books. I read 15 books in April, 16 books in May, and 10 books in June. And I think a big part of that was the readathons, because I was very into readathons during those months, and I would like to do that again this year, but I'll get to that in my goal setting. But so that's an average of 7 books a month. That's a very healthy number of books. So this is where we get into the more interesting stats. So I'll put some charts that you've already seen maybe in the screen recording. I'll put them to the side of me. But so yeah, I have that books read by month, which is kind of a it dips maybe a little bit in March and then goes straight up in April, May, June, and then July and August are very sad months. It's because I moved cross country. So I did not read a lot because a lot of my books were either being moved or I was too tired or busy to read. So I think I only read one book each of those months. And then clearly we're getting back on track with reading in the fall of reading like 4 to 6 books a month the rest of the year. So here's kind of the core stats that I'm tracking and making sure that I'm paying attention to is kind of the racial, ethnic diversity of the authors that I read. So this is kind of a sad pie chart for me because I'm reading 52% white authors, 52.4% white authors, which is not what I want. I don't want that. It's pretty good that I have almost a quarter of authors I read who are Black. That's pretty good. But these other categories are depressing. Like, only 2% Latinx authors. That's upsetting. Only 1% Indigenous or First Nation authors. Like, that's also upsetting. So, what I would like this pie chart to look like next year is for white authors not to be the majority, and for these other categories of race and ethnicity to be more spread out, more diverse, more, like, I just want to read from more perspectives, so I want this to look a little different next year. And then I had 34.5% of authors were LGBT, which is pretty good, so like about a third. I'm not mad about that. I think that's about what I would want. And then translated, that ended up being something that I tracked near the end. I added it as a column. And 8% translated, like, I'm fine with that. I think I just want to be aware that I am reading some translated works. And so I think that number, yeah, so that's 7 books that I read. So I'd like that number to be a little higher, but it's not bad. And then I have my breakdown of fiction and nonfiction. So 35% nonfiction, 64% fiction. So that sounds fine to me. Very comfortable with that stat. And then I have, in terms of the gender of the authors, I had 64% were female authors, 8% non-binary authors, and only 26% male authors. And a lot of those authors were obviously like, I don't know, gay or not just white men, not just white cis straight men. So I think that's a pretty good matchup for me. I think I could be a little bit better at reading even more non-binary authors, but I think that that's actually like not bad considering that it's not something I tracked until partway through the year. So I feel comfortable about this stat. Those are my overall stats. Now, about my goals. When I think about reading diversity, I don't just want to do it just to fill these pie charts in like a more colorful way. I would like to do it because those are the books that I like the most, usually. So I wrote some of the stats. So from my favorite books of 2020 video, there were 10 books in that video that were my absolute favorites of last year. 7 of the 10 were by authors of color, and 5 of the 10 were by Black authors. So if more than half of my favorites from last year were by authors of color, then way more than half the books I read should be by authors of color if I'm liking books by those authors. So it's not just reading diversely for diversity's sake. I also looked, and 4 of my 10 favorites were by LGBT authors, so I think hitting that like 1/3 to 40% of LGBT authors, like of books read being by LGBT authors, would be good. The list of my goals for the spreadsheet are to read at least half of the book, or more than half of the book that I read by authors of color, and then at least 33%, so at least a third of books I read, by LGBT authors. And then I have a goal about the length of books that I'm reading, so I'd like to read at least 10 books over 400 pages. This year I only read 8, and of those 8, half of them were in my favorites. So 4 of the 8 books that I read over 400 pages made it to my favorite, top 10 list. So clearly I'm enjoying those long books. So I want to be reading more of those, because I think maybe just something about spending more time with a topic or with characters probably does better for them in terms of me feeling connected. Although there is something to be said about there's art and brevity and all of that of it's nice to have short books too. I love good short books. I love brief, concise books. So yeah, I'd like to read 10 books over 400 pages, and then I have a tag, so let me show you on my little screen recording. I have a shelf, a tag, on Goodreads called Unread Physical, and it's all of the books that are in this apartment that I own physical copies of that I have not read, and that number is 138 books, which is a little bit high, but not as high as I was worried about, because when we moved, we got rid of a lot of books, and a lot of books that I didn't care about got left behind. So my goal for the year is just to simply get that number on that shelf and on these shelves to be under 100. Just get it under 100. So basically, to me, that means I need to read 38 books on the shelves, or 39 books technically, but then I also need to read any books that I accumulate, or I need to make up for it. So if I buy 10 more books, I need to either read 10 more books, either those that I just bought, or 10 off my shelves. Or I need to unhaul some, and I need to give them away or sell them or whatever, if I'm actually not going to read it. So I think this is a doable goal, especially considering how much I read last year. I think it's very doable. I think the key is going to be not buying too many books, even though I just did a massive book haul. Not buying too many books and reading plenty of books, and I think that's kind of hard to balance sometimes with trying to read longer books, but then also trying to read as many books as possible. So I think it'll just be a balancing act there, but I think it's very doable. Also, I don't think I mentioned, but my overall goal is still to read 80 books, because I didn't expect to get to 80 this year, or 84 this year. So I just want to get to 80. If I'm a little bit low on that, I'm not that concerned about the numbers. I can always read some quicker graphic novels if I need to, but that's just my Goodreads goal, is 80 books. And then my only other goals around reading are about YouTube and BookTube and this channel. So I kind of abandoned this channel just a little bit. I think it was a combo of me moving, and I think I got into a reading slump also. I never really stopped watching book content. I just stopped feeling the need to make it. But I think I feel more excited to make stuff now. I feel a little bit more settled in my life and ready to make stuff. So my loose goal is trying to make about a video a week. We'll see what happens. My other goal is just to participate in a lot of readathons and maybe make some BookTube friends or collaborators or whatever. I think that's very doable between readathon videos, hauls, wrap-ups, reviews, that whole gambit of book videos. I think it's very possible for me to do about a video a week, but yeah, and I really want to do participate in readathons, because last year it was a super useful tool to me. I read so many books for readathons that both ended up being in my favorites of the year lists. Between the Queer Lit readathon, I think 2 of the books that I read for that ended up in my favorites, and one of them I read because of Asian, the Asian readathon. Clearly readathons are a helpful tool for me, so I would like to continue to participate in readathons. those are my book goals. I decided not to set too ambitious of goals for 2021 because honestly, I'm hoping if all goes well that I don't have a lot of time to read, because I hope I'm able to travel and do other things. But I'm not betting on that. So I'm just trying to match what I did this year, and do a little bit better in certain areas. So if you enjoyed this video, let me know. Let me know what your goals are, book-wise or otherwise, in the comments. I would love to hear them. And I will put a link to my 2021 reading tracker spreadsheet in case you are curious and in case you want to track your own reading. So I should be able to make a link to that you can make a copy of the spreadsheet and save it and use it yourself if you're interested in that. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.